Thank you. How long would you advocate for a friend, a family member, or a loved one? How long would you speak for them if they couldn't speak for themselves? What actions would you take to make sure their voice was heard? E.M. Forrester once said, "One person with passion is greater than 40 people merely interested." I've worked in law enforcement for 15 years. I've had the privilege of working with our local prosecutors, police officers, victims' families, advocates, all of these people moving to find justice for someone else. This particular group has come together and had a 16-year battle in trying to find justice for the murder of Chris Olinger. Now Chris, he was a high school student. He went to Monterey High. He was passionate about life. He loved photography. He loved being part of the ROTC. He loved participating in his drama class. Chris had a family that loved him. He had a younger brother, Travis, aged 10 years old. He had a mother, Michelle Phillips, and he had a father, Lauren Phillips. His father was actually his stepfather, who had adopted him when he was just an infant. In September of 1997, Chris received an assignment from high school, a photography assignment. It was kind of a dealer's choice. He got to pick what he wanted to do for the assignment, and so he chose to do a nighttime photography project. He told his mom he was going to borrow her car and go down to Lover's Point to photograph the moon that night. His mom didn't want him to go, not alone. It was dark. It was late. She wanted him to take a friend. They argued about it, and finally, Chris conceded. Okay, I'll take my best friend. So off he went. Unfortunately, his best friend's mother wouldn't let him go. So instead of coming home, Chris went on his own at the age of 17 in his mom's car to Lover's Point in Pacific Grove, a local spot where everybody knows and everybody goes in our local community. It's America's hometown. Chris never made it home that night. And in the morning, his mother started calling around, asking, reporting to the police, "Where is my son?" Well, in the early morning hours, a jogger was running in Pacific Grove near the lighthouse through a turnout and observed a young man's body laying on the beach. Actually, it was in a turnout above the beach. It was Chris Olinger. His car was missing, his camera was missing, all of his personal belongings gone. It was a very beautiful morning that morning when Chris was found, laying in the dirt turnout. You can see in the photograph here, his body is laying there. It's covered with a tarp. And then there's little markers that head back toward the ocean. The investigators, all they had was Chris's body and these drops of blood that led to the cliff, and drag marks where he had dragged his own body, crawling, trying to get help. When the investigators got closer to the cliff, they noticed a disturbance in the dirt, as if a struggle had happened there, and additional blood spots. When they looked to where the drag marks were from the struggle to the cliff, at the very bottom of the cliff, they found blood. It all came out to be Chris's blood. What they deduced at that point, having no other information, is that there was a struggle at the top of the cliff, and Chris was dragged over and dumped into the ocean at the bottom of the cliff. But Chris was still alive, and he fought to survive, and so he climbed up this vertical cliff. He had sustained 30 stab wounds, a lot to his front, but the majority in his back, to his face, and defensive wounds on his hands. trying to stay alive as he fought his attacker. Chris would have survived if he had gotten help. Of all the stab wounds, there was one that nicked a small portion of his heart. And so every time he made that effort to climb up that cliff, every time his heart pumped, it pumped more and more blood out into the sac surrounding the heart until his heart seized and stopped operating as he was crawling for help. So now we have a dead body. We have no other evidence. Chris's mother, Michelle Phillips, demanded of the police, find my son's killer. Find justice for Chris. She fought long and hard. Approximately 2 weeks later, Chris's car was located in San Jose. Forensics went over it, the FBI went over it, the Department of Justice criminalists went over it, and they recovered DNA and fingerprints from that car. They put them into the database that we had at that time in 1997, and there were no hits. So if there are no hits, then there's no way you can identify whose fingerprints they are. And so the case sat. The investigators did what they could. They interviewed Chris's friends, acquaintances, trying to see if there was a local connection. Everything led to a dead end. Michelle Phillips kept pushing, find justice for my child. Eventually, the toll on her was too much, and she was fighting her own personal battle with cancer, and she ended up dying in 2003, tragically never seeing justice for her son. Loren Phillips, Chris's stepfather, took up the charge. He came back to the police station. Find justice for my son. Find out who did this to my child. Help us find justice. He raised money in the community to get a reward, hoping that someone would come forward with information. Because they still didn't have anything. They had Chris's body, and they had the car that was located in San Jose. Well, technology finally caught up, and in 2005, the Department of Justice notified Pacific Grove Police Department that the fingerprints and DNA did match up with someone. They matched up with a pair of brothers, a pair of gang members from Soledad, California. But all we have are fingerprints and DNA, and that is not enough for the criminal justice system in the United States. We have the highest burden of proof to bring people to justice in the entire world. Just because their prints and DNA were on the victim's car did not mean that they were responsible for the murder. We needed more. Loren Phillips demanded, find more, do more. At that point, we're years after Chris has been killed, many, many years. The original investigating officer retired. A different investigating officer moves in. That's investigator Tom Uretsky. He dusts off the boxes. He goes through the file over and over again. And he decides he's going to go to those two suspects who currently, at that time in 2005, were in custody for committing other carjackings, other armed robberies. So that's why their prints ended up in the system. He contacts them. They refuse to say anything. They are not communicating. So then he figures, I'm going to talk to who they were hanging out with in 1997 and see if I can get more information. And he did. He was able to locate 4 witnesses, 4 very important witnesses, who were also related to gangs, who were so afraid of these 2 individuals that during the trial that eventually came about, they had to be identified by number instead of name so that they could stay as anonymous as possible and not have a gang hit put out on them. So we now have enough information. With the help of these witnesses, 2 of which who witnessed the actual murder, we are ready to charge Jacobo Ruelas and Angel Ruelas with the homicide, the killing of Chris Olinger. The criminal process starts. They come to court. It takes years. It takes years and years. In fact, it takes so many years that in 2008, Loren Phillips passes away, waiting for justice for his stepson. Now there's only one family member left, and that's Travis, who was 10 at the time of his brother's murder. He starts coming to court with the prosecutor who was assigned at the time, pushing judges. Let's get this thing to trial. Let's do this thing. Let's find justice for my brother. But the defendants, they were very sophisticated, and they used every ploy possible to delay and delay. One of them was heard to say, "Slow your roll, homie," to another gang member. Witnesses gain amnesia. That was their goal. Eventually, it worked for some of them. Some of the witnesses passed away. The original forensic examiner of Chris's body ended up having lymphoma and was in his 80s. We didn't know if he was going to make it to trial. And the prosecutor assigned eventually said, "I can't take any more. I need to leave." She medically needed to retire. This was in 2012. I became involved with the case at that point. The case was set for trial in 4 months. I was given the case. The case involved 17,000 pages of investigation. It took months to go through that. On the day of trial, as we're set to go, Angel Ruelas decided he was going to plead guilty to everything. He wanted to admit his culpability, and he did so with no deal made. His brother, Jacobo Ruelas, the true ringleader, the true heavy in the case, would not concede. But again, the case took a toll, and his attorney ended up in the hospital with heart issues and had to resign from the case. So now a new attorney had to be found for the defendant, and they had to go through the 17,000 pages of discovery. They had to get up to speed. Eventually, in 2013, in September of 2013, we were able to finally get to trial. Interestingly enough, all of these people's passion, it made it worth it. He was convicted, and the jury, unknowing to themselves, brought back a guilty verdict on all counts and special circumstances for the murder of Chris Olinger on Chris Olinger's birthday. One person with passion is better than 40 people merely interested. I urge you to be the one. Find your passion and be the one. Thank you.